Yeah. So in this video, we are going to understand a concept called JDBC, which stands for Java Database Connectivity, where we have a Java program, which is by which we can design an applications of your own. So now this application wants to interact with the database like MySQL, Oracle, or MS Access, etc. So these are some of the databases where your Java code wants to extract the data or insert the data into those databases. So for doing the operations on the JDBC, so for doing the operations on the databases using your Java application, we are going to use an API here, and we name that API as your JDBC, where your JDBC stands for, as I said, it's the Java Database Connectivity. So now we'll see in detail what are the functionalities, what are the methods, what are the classes, and what are the interfaces we see in these APIs, and also we'll understand how we are going to utilize the functionalities of it in this video. So as I said, it stands for Java Database Connectivity, which is a standard API for database independent connectivity between the Java programming language and other databases which exist in this world. So this, the speciality of this JDBC is that it supports two-tier and as well as three-tier processing models also. Three-tier in the sense where we include the servers, where if I say two-tier, we don't have an isolated server. So we have a dedicated server and a client, and the client directly interacts with the server in the, if I talk about a two-tier architecture. And if we talk about a three-tier architecture, we have a client and we have a server, and in turn that server is going to interact with another database server. So if that is the scenario, then we call it as a three-tier architecture. Okay. So now, as I said, it's an API. Your JDBC is an API, and we have a manager connection. Okay, and also this is going to support your JDBC manager to driver connection. So we can understand all those things in detail. So we call these things as the architecture of your JDBC. So now if you see the architecture of your JDBC, so we find your Java application. Your Java application should include the API of JDBC. Means your Java application will be interacting with your JDBC API. And this API is going to contain some driver manager, and we have different types of JDBC drivers exist. So I can have, suppose in this architectural diagram, we have only 3 different JDBC drivers, and we'll talk about these drivers later. But for now, what we understand is that, okay, we have a specialized driver for Oracle database. We have a specialized driver for SQL Server, and also we have a specialized driver for your MS Access like databases we have. So it means that, so with this diagram, what you understand is that for every database, we have a separate driver. Means your JDBC API is going to provide a separate driver for every database. Suppose if I take the example of what do you say, MongoDB. MongoDB is also a database, okay, and Fox Pro is a database. So for interacting with databases also, we are going to have a separate APIs. So now we'll see what are the components we have for your JDBC. So we have a JDBC API, which is going to provide some methods as well as the interfaces. So for communicating with your database, for establishing the connection, for executing the query. So all those things, we are going to have the specific methods there. And then we are going to have a driver manager. So what this driver manager is going to do is, this driver manager is going to load a specific driver which is needed for the database. And then we are going to have a suite, right? A test suite where it is going to check whether this particular driver is useful for the database or not. And for databases, for some databases like Microsoft databases, we are going to have the bridges, like we call them as your JDBC, ODBC bridge. And we call it as your ODBC bridge. So these are the components of your databases, of your JDBC. And all these components of your JDBC has to be executed in a sequential manner, like that. So we cannot go 1, 3, 4, 2, like, no. It should be done first, second, third, as well as your fourth. It means that all these things has to be done only in a sequential manner. So now we'll talk about the drivers we have. So we have the first driver here. So we have a first driver here, and we call this driver as JDBC ODBC bridge driver. Now, if you see this diagram, so what is going to happen here now? We are going to have my Java application, right? And then this Java application is going to interact with my bridge driver. And this bridge driver is going to interact with my ODBC driver. And this, with the help of this ODBC driver, we are going to connect with the different databases we have. So if this is the architecture which we are going to follow, right, then we call it as your type 1 driver, or sometimes we call it as your, as I said, it is a type 1 driver. So we can also call this driver as JDBC, ODBC bridge driver also. So now if you can see this diagram here now, we have an interaction here between your ODBC driver and the databases. So we have a DBMS call here. It means that whenever I submit a query, okay, that query is going to interact with your database directly, and it is going to perform, or it is going to execute that particular query on the engine, where it is going to generate the data, and data is being sent back to your Java application. So all these things, so the information will be flowing in this direction, and after executing the query, the information generated by the engine or your database will be supplied onto your Java application, where we can see the output of your instruction on the console of your Java application. So it is about your type 1 driver. So in this type 1 driver, it is going to act as a bridge, right? Interface between the client and your database server. The driver connects JDBC methods calls into ODBC function calls, as I said. The bridge is usually used when there is no pure Java driver. So this point we need to underline. So there is no pure Java driver available for a particular database. Okay. So if that is the case, right? If there is no pure Java driver available, then we go for your JDBC ODBC bridge. And one interesting thing is that this driver is platform dependent, and it works for your Microsoft softwares only, and libraries we need, and we need the native libraries. It means that we need to have the libraries of that particular OS. And also using this driver has got other dependencies such as ODBC must be installed on the client machine. Means that if you want to use my JDBC ODBC bridge, we need to have your ODBC has to be installed on your client. And without installing it, we cannot perform, or we cannot execute your JDBC ODBC type 1 driver. And the advantage of this type 1 driver is that allows you to communicate with all the database ODBC supporting things, and it represents vendor independent driver, right? So it is an independent driver. Okay. So the disadvantage of your type 1 driver is that it becomes slow, right? So whenever I convert my JDBC to ODBC to your databases, it is a bit slow. It means that there need to be some sort of conversions or typecasting between your Java to your JDBC, from your JDBC to your ODBC, and then that instruction has to be executed on the engine. So all those things has to be done, has to be compiled and executed. Okay. So for them, so it is going to take some time. Okay. And installed on the client machine, as I said, discussed earlier, and consider the client side software needed to. It is about your type 1 driver. Now coming on to your type 2 driver, right? So in case of your type 2 driver, which is Java 2 native API, okay, and we can also call it as your type 2 driver also now. So what happens here is that your Java application is going to interact with your type 2 driver, and this type 2 driver is going to interact with your database server directly. So this is a native call. This is a native call. It means that the driver as well as the application, the instructions which will interact with your database are developed only in your Java code. So that's why we call it as your native code. Okay. Is a database driver implement that uses client-side libraries or native libraries for the databases. The driver converts JDBC method calls into the native calls written in your C or your C++, which is very crucial here. So whatever the instructions or whatever the instructions which we assign onto the database, okay, are converted into the languages of C and C++, and they are executed on your database. Okay, so that's why we call them as your native drivers. So the advantage of type 2 driver is that it is better performance than your type 1. It is better performance than type 1 since no JDBC to ODBC transaction is needed. So when compared to your type 1, okay, when compared to your type 1, the advantage of my type 2 is that there is a best performance here. And disadvantage of type 2 driver is that the vendor client library needs to be installed on the client machine, okay? And it cannot be used in internet due to the client-side software needed. And not all databases give the client-side library. So these are the main disadvantages we have for your type 2 driver we have. And now we'll come to your type 3 driver. We'll see it as your Java 2 network protocol, where what we'll do is your Java program is going to interact with your driver first, and the driver in turn, we are going to interact with the server, which is called as a middleware server. And this server in turn is going to have a driver server by which we are going to interact with your database. So in your type 1 driver, we have ODBC. Type 2 driver, it is a native. Whereas if it is a type 3 driver, we are going to have your middleware server, right? Middleware server. Okay, so this type 3 driver translates JDBC calls into database server, independent and middleware server specific calls. Okay. With the help of the middleware server, the translated JDBC calls are further translated into database specific calls. So this point has to be identified here now. So whatever the instructions you give onto the database are converted according to your database specific calls. And the middleware server can be added in an application with some additional functionality such as tool management, performance improvement, and your connection availability. So these are few features we have for your type 3 driver. So the advantage of your type 3 driver is that we have, since the communication between the client and middleware server is database independent, and there is no need for the vendor database library. Whereas in your type 2, type 1 driver, what we are talking is that every database should have its own library, right? But whereas in your type 3 driver, there is no need for that vendor specific database library. The middleware server can be full-fledged. It can be your JT Enterprise Edition application server, can provide typical middleware service like caching, connections, query results, and so on. And also it is going to take care about the load balancing. So if multiple clients interact with your server, then they need to be a load balancer there. So all those load balancing items will be taken care by your middleware server. And the disadvantage here we have in your type 3 or middleware server is it requires database specific coding to be done in the middleware. An extra layer added may result in a time bottleneck, so it may take some time. It performs tasks slowly due to the increased number of network calls, and it is costly. It means that it is going to take some time in interacting with your databases, with your application. So now coming on to your type 4 driver here now, which I call it as my Java 2 database driver directly. So there is no any intermediate applications down here. Your Java application is going to interact with your type 4, and the type 4 directly interact with your databases and all. So there is no intermediate, means that so just by seeing this diagram, we'll understand that it is faster when compared to other also. It is a pure Java driver, right? Which implements your database protocol to interact with directly with your databases. This type of driver does not require any native libraries. Okay. Type 4 driver translate jdbc calls into database specific network calls. It is installed inside your Java virtual machine of the client. So there is no separate libraries which need to be installed when I use your type 4 driver. That's the advantage we have. And the advantage is that we use these applications for web applications to design them. It's a pure Java driver, okay? Does not require any native library and does not require any middleware server. So we don't need them, right? If you are not utilizing them, or if you are not using them, it means that it is not going to take much of your time. So it can be executed in a faster way. So that's the advantage we have if you use your type 4 driver. So the disadvantage is that there is a separate driver needed for the database to the client. So this is the only disadvantage we have if you're type 4 driver. So when compared to your type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 is the best one. But we are going to choose these drivers depending upon the environment we have. Suppose if you say we have a specific database like MS Access, then we need to go for my type 1 driver. If I use MySQL or if I use your Oracle, then we need to go to your type 2 or type 4 drivers. So depending upon the database we choose, we are going to utilize or we are going to identify the particular types to interact with that particular databases. So if any Java application or an applet wants to connect with the database, then there are various classes and interfaces available in my Java SQL part. Depending upon the requirements, these classes and interfaces can be used. So your Java API, jdbc API is going to contain, as I said, it is going to contain different classes, different interfaces, and depending upon the requirement, we are going to use these classes and interfaces which can be used for interacting with your databases. So these are some of the classes I use very frequently. So we use my data, a driver manager, property, SQL permission, types, and types. Out of all those things, so the class which we are going to use more frequently is your driver manager. So we are going to use the driver manager very frequently for every program. But whereas all those things are not compulsory, so they may be used depending upon the requirement of your application. So these are some of the interfaces we have. So driver, which is going to install the driver to your JVM. And then for establishing the connection with your database, we use this interface. And for creating an environment where you can execute your particular query, you're going to use your statement. And then this statement, different types of statements we have. Then we have a prepaid statement. Then we are going to have a callable statements. When I have a particular query, I have a query and I want to execute that query repeatedly. Okay. when I use my query, when I want to execute a particular query with runtime values. So I want to give some runtime values and I want to execute that query many times. Then in that case, then we go with your prepared statement. And the callable statement, when I have a procedures. So we have procedures. Sometimes I can also call these procedures as functions, right? So whenever I want to call a function which is there on your database, that function can be this procedure can be a trigger also, or this procedure can be a cursor on your database also. So when I want to call them, right, then we are going to use your callable statement. Then for storing the result given by the engine to the database. So onto my Java application, then we are going to use your result set. Okay. Then we have your blob and clob, right? Blob and clob, and these are used for what you say images. So whenever I want to store the data in the form of an image, or whenever I want to store the data in the form of an audio, then we are going to use these interfaces. Then if I would like to generate the information about the table, I have a table with me. Now I want to generate the information about the table, then we're going to use my result set as well as a data set and all. Okay. Yeah. We use this interfaces, right? So now we have this package, right? This Java SQL JavaX dot SQL is a package which we need to import into a Java program. So we have your data source, right? As I said, then you need to have your connection statement, and then we are going to have the transaction, and then we are going to generate the output. So whatever the output generated by the database, right? As I said, it need to be stored into your result set. So those are called as my row sets, and we are going to add them. Okay, and then we are going to extract the data. We are going to perform the operations on the objects and all those things which can be done on the interface or the classes we have. Janeta, 5 నిమిషాలు. So now these are some of, as I said, these are some of statement interfaces we have. So we have a simple statement, as I said, we have a prepaid statement, and also we are having a callable statement also. So the methods which we are going to have here is add batch, clear batch, execute batch, execute update, and execute query. So we use so these three instructions or these three functionalities, whenever I see a batch, what we do is we have a set of queries, and these set of queries form a batch. Okay. So if I execute that batch, whatever the queries which are there in that batch will be executed dynamically. And they can take the inputs dynamically, or sometimes they can take the values statically also. Okay. But whereas if I execute the method called execute update, okay, so if we have execute update, right? So what it happens is whenever I have a table and I want to update the content which is there in the table, right? So when I want to update a table, then we are going to utilize the method called execute update. And whenever I want to extract the data from the database and I want to show on the console of your database, then we approach a query, or we approach a particular method, and we call that method as your executed query. So these are some of the functionalities which we come across on the interface called your statement interface. So now we understand what are the steps we have for using your database. Okay. So we need to import the package and we need to load the driver. So we need to load the driver because this is the primary thing which has to be done. Okay. Whenever I perform my JDBC application, then we need to establish the connection with your database where we are going to use a method called as get connection method, right? And then we are going to create a statement where we are going to create an environment where I can execute the instructions of your JDBC program. And then we are going to execute a query, right? We are going to execute a particular statement by using your execute query. Then we are going to have the results, okay? And then we are going to close the connection. So when I open a connection, we need to close that connection. So the connection can be closed by using your close. So we establish the connection here. Okay, we are establishing the connection here, and we are going to close the connection there. So the statement interface is used to execute a static query. Static query in the means that whatever the instruction which need to be executed, right, has to be there as a part of that instructions only. So then we are going to use my simple statement. So we have a small example here. So where I use your MySQL as your database. Okay. So we have a database of MySQL. Then we are going to use my DSN name, data source name. Then we are going to have the root, and then we are going to specify the query which need to be executed, and then collection class dot for name, where we are going to specify the driver name. See here now we are having a driver name here, so we are going to specify the driver name here. We are going to establish the connection, creating the statement, and then so whatever the output which is generated, right? It may be one row, it may be multiple rows. So we use a while loop here, and while loop iterate is that it is going to extract all the rows, okay, all the rows which are there in your object. And then this is your main method where we are going to call that method, establish the connection where we can see the output of my program. Now coming on to your prepaid state. Okay. In the prepaid statement, I need this, or we are going to take the help of this prepaid statement when need the input, right, dynamically. Earlier, when I talk about the statement, we take the input statically. But whereas if I use my prepaid statement, we are going to take the values dynamically, okay? And it's a subclass of your interface, okay? So just we will see. So if I see the question mark here, it means that these are the things which are to be supplied dynamically from the standard input device. Okay. So I have a query here, okay, which is going to take the question mark. And this question mark are the values which need to be taken dynamically. Okay. So I am saying that first column means this is going to fit here. This value is going to fit here, and this value is going to fit here. Okay, so these are the things which we are going to update them dynamically. We can even give using the method set string, or we can even supply them dynamically. We can update. The same thing happens now. Okay, execute. So we are going to update. So whenever I want to perform my updating, as I said, we are going to insert the things into your database. Then obviously we are going to use a method called as your update method. Then callable statement. As I said, whenever I want to call the stored procedures from the database, right, then we are going to use your callable statements, where we are going to have in parameters and out parameters, where we are going to communicate with the instructions which are there in these functions, right? Like these are like your arguments, which take some values into the method and which is going to give some values from the function to the outside world. So those types of variables, I call them as in and out variables. Okay. And the example here is that now index register out parameter, we are going to have the index, okay, callable statements we have. So see here now. So we are having a method called emp method, right? So we are going to call a method called emp. So we are going to call this method. So whenever I want to call this method, we are going to use my execute, where we need to supply some arguments into it. So whenever I supply some arguments, then it is going to take those values, and then it is going to extract the values for you and supply them onto your console. So there is a very simple example how we are going to create a procedure. These are the procedures. Okay, this is the declaration center section we have, and we are going to have the method in this way. Like say, in this method, we are going to have particular instructions which need to be executed and all. Okay, so this is how we are going to call a method here. So the name of it is procedure one. Okay, now I want to call this, right? So I want to call this method. So whenever I want to call this method, I use my call, and then I use my procedure name, where we need to supply some arguments. So by supplying the arguments, right, what I do is I call that method. So whenever I call that method, obviously it will be executed in the backend, right? So in these things, now we are going to have your argument numbers, right? Arguments numbers, where we need to supply some values, and then we are going to execute them. And if I have an error there, we are going to have an exception where we are supposed to handle that exception and all. So now we'll talk about a very interesting thing, okay, called as my execute query. Execute query, as I said, a result set is an interface, right, on which we are going to perform an operation called as my execute query. So when I execute a particular query on the engine, it generates some data, and whatever the data generated by the engine has to be holded in some object, okay, where I can extract the data from that object. Okay, so all those things can be done by using your result set, and we can iterate them by using your next method. Next is a method where we are going to use that method under your while loop, where we are going to extract the data row wise, and every row also we can add some functions on it, which can be column 1, column 2, column 3, and we can examine. So we have a small example how we are going to perform your result set now. So we have my statement result set. I'll go there. Yeah, execute query. So I'm having a query. I'm executing that query, and we are storing that output in the reset, right? So reset is an object. Reset dot next. It means that we are going to extract the rows, right? So the object will be in this way, and it is going to contain the rows from the table. And suppose I say I'm having 4 columns in it. Right? So suppose the name here is that serial number, this is name, this is salary, this is your address. So now I want to extract your name. So whenever I want to extract the name, just I'll be specifying the name of the column. So if I give the name of the column, obviously, whatever the data which is there in that particular column is being shown as an output. Suppose I want to have the salary. So instead of name, I say salary, but it is not string. Suppose if it is an integer, so I need to say get string of salary. So all those things we need to observe while coding the things. Okay. So with this content, we are going now. I think now we understood how we are going to execute your operations, or how we are going to understand. Now we understood how we are going to interact with your databases, how we are going to execute the operation. So I think all those things has been understood by you well. Okay, so we'll meet in the next video.